Welcome to Plan9Crunch. I'm Doug Gibson, and this is Joe Gibson. And I don't know if you can see this book, but it's called, it has a Ed Wood's Warm Angora Wishes and Rubber Octopus Dreams. It's published by Arcane Shadows Press. Joe, keep it up there so everyone can see it. And it's an anthology of Ed Wood stories, mostly short stories. There are a couple of essays. One is on Conrad Brooks, who was a confidant and fellow actor of Wood for a long time. And then there's a late chapter talking about the enduring popularity of Plan 9 from Outer Space. And then there's also some stuff at the back where Frank Delestrito has recorded and put on paper some letters Ed Wood sent to Bela Lugosi. And that gives you sort of a window into how Ed Wood worked as a very low budget filmmaker, trying to get money, trying to deal with people hassling. It's pretty fascinating. So, the book was released very recently. It apparently sold very well at Monster Bash, according to Brad Braddock, who published it. And a gentleman named Kurt McCoy, who is a really, really hardworking guy, edited it. He also has a story. And I want to talk about a few of the stories right now. By the way, we were supposed to have two people here tonight, but we're still going to do this and talk about this wonderful new book. So, Ed Wood was, of course, the one-lung filmmaker back in the 50s. They made a movie, Ed Wood, starring Johnny Depp, and his main films were Glyn or Glinda. Then he made one called Jailbait, and he made another one, Bride of the Monster, which is more famous than others. And then he made Plan 9 from Outer Space, which is probably the big one in his repertoire, although a lot of people like Glyn or Glinda most also. And then he made Night of the Ghouls, and that was sort of the Ed Wood canon for a long time. And most of these stories revolve around those. I actually wrote one of the stories in this book, and it deals with Final Curtain, which is a short that Ed Wood tried to get made into a movie. To a TV series, but it didn't work out. But Final Curtain is also a short story, and it also is related to a short story called Night of the Banshee, at least in my opinion, and I incorporated those. Let's talk a little bit about some of the short stories. The first, and then Joe, I'll ask you about some too. The first is by Greg Mank, who's a pretty well-known author in the industry, in the cult genre, and he writes an interesting story called Ed Wood and the Mystery Tower Sitter. And it's about Ed Wood trying to get a star for his movies. And it portrays Wood as a pretty aggressive guy. He goes up to Glenn Strange. Now, who knows who is Glenn Strange, Joe?
Famous actor from from a lot of stuff. I know him as the Frankenstein monster.
Well, that's what he's iconic for. He's the Frankenstein monster after Karloff and Chaney Jr. and Lugosi had times at it. And basically, when I was growing up as a late baby boomer, Frankenstein monster always looked like Glenn Strange.
Of course, that's the thing, though, right? He kind of acted differently in those films. Like in
House
of Frankenstein, he's all, obviously that stays, but House of Frankenstein, he's all beaming and happy like a child, and then he speaks in Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein.
There's something you have to know about those House movies, is a lot of the film is stuff from previous movies. Okay,
that's fair.
I mean, Strange only made like $500 for one of the House movies.
Oh, darn.
He was only on set for a week or so. But anyways, Ed Wood tries to get Glenn Strange to be a star. Strange gently lets him down. In the story also, Ed Wood tries to get Lon Chaney to be in a movie too. And so it's just an interesting little tale from Greg Mank, who's a talented writer, about how aggressive Wood might have been trying to get stars in his movies. He also drags a fake vampire there who doesn't treat him with much respect in the story. We're not going to go over every story. If you want to see that, Joe Blevins, who runs the Ed Wood Wednesdays blog, is going to review all the stories. He's already reviewed a couple of them. And they'll be on the Ed Wood Jr. Facebook page, which is run by Brad Blackburn, who we're going to have on a show, God willing. But we're going to have a show later this month. So the next story I want to talk about is mine. What do you know? And I don't, it's Final Curtain Revisited. Now, Final Curtain takes place in the old Dome Theater, at least the show, in Los Angeles. And I'm a Los Angeles County kid. And there's this actor. This is Final Curtain, the original. And he's wandering through the stage. And it's midnight. And he sees sort of, at one point, he sees a sort of vampire-like woman. And she's beckoning to him. But he says, no, I'm not getting involved with this. And he goes through the stage and all the areas. And Dudley Manlove of Plan 9, who plays Eros, he narrates it. Manlove actually had a career as a voice in radio and also advertising and things like that, in advertisements. So it ends with the character who's played by, what's his name? The guy in Plan9Crunch he's in all of Ed Wood's movies, but he only made Ed Wood's movies.
Not Duke Moore, is it?
Duke Moore, yeah,
Okay,
James
yeah.
Duke Moore. And all you hear is Dudley Manlove's voice. And at the very end, Moore slips into a coffin. Well, that story always fascinated me. All right, and part of it's in the movie Plan 9 Night of the Ghouls. So I decided to write a sequel where Moore's character, the actor, and that's just what you call him, wakes up every maybe decade or so to greet another member of the stage who is ending their life there, preparing to end their life. And so he goes through a lot of the same things you see in the movie. Also, I read the book, and I recommend getting one of those. There are Ed Wood short stories books, and they are, I would check Ed Wood's short stories on Amazon and see which one has Final Curtain. There's 2 books published. One is by Bear Manor. The other, I can't recall the name right now. Sorry. We could put it in the notes, though. And so, anyways, he's going through there, and he greets the stagehand. That's what I call him. He's taking the stagehand back. Earlier in my story, the vampire is killing the critic, okay? Because she lures men in there and kills them. And he's trying to guide the stagehand back to a peaceful death. And the stagehand goes into the room with the vampire woman, and he sort of breaks the rules, the actor, by stopping her from hurting him. I don't want to go any more to that. I don't want to give the end of the story, but also, for those of you who have seen Night of the Ghouls, Valda Hansen was an actress and a friend of Wood, and she played the White Ghost. And in Night of the Ghouls, the White Ghost is constantly terrified by a black ghost who's in a cemetery. And the interesting thing is, it's obvious the black ghost scenes are from a different movie, because when they have the black ghost in other scenes, it's Ed Wood dressed in drag with a thing over his. It's sort of weird. And so I believe that the black ghost, who is played by Jeannie Stevens, is in the movie Night of the Banshee, which is the other one that Wood tried to make a TV series out of. By the way, Final Curtain and Night of the Banshee were going to be episodes in a show called Portraits in Terror, I believe. Just didn't work out. But I think that Night of the Banshee, those parts exist, even though the film is lost. And Night of the Banshee is also a short story, which is pretty good too. You can find in Wood's collection. So I incorporate the vampire woman. No, I incorporate Valda Hansen's White Ghost as taking over for the black ghost, because at the very end of Night of the Ghouls, Valda Hansen's walking toward the black ghost in the cemetery, and she sort of disappears. You know how they do it in film. So it was a lot of fun to write this story, and I appreciate anyone who reads it. And this book is only $9.99 on Kindle. It's more expensive, probably in Dead Tree, but it's really good story. Okay, so that was my story, and I probably spent too much time on it. But Joe, let's talk about one right now. It is by Frank Delastrito. Did you read that story?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's called,
this
let me
morning.
see what it's called again. And you can help me if I say this word wrong. But it's called, where am I? On here. I've got the Kindle up right now.
I've got the book up right now.
Okay, it's called Plan 1 from Poughkeepsie. Is that how you say it?
Plan 1 from Poughkeepsie. That's how I'd say it on page
tell us
123.
tell us about Frank's story, which I thought was really good.
Oh yeah, it's very well written. Just gotta find it here. Page 123. So it seemed to be. I would like to have him on to explain it a bit more because I haven't done the research he has, but it seems to be interesting historical fiction was what I got from it.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is a book of fiction stuff primarily.
Well, it's
right?
Ed Wood growing up as a boy.
Well, yeah, basically. It's
how
that.
he gets influenced. What's the big thing that he gets from his parents?
He gets that camera. I don't know cameras too well. Let me.
Is it
go
8mm? Was it?
It's the next page. Kodak Cine Special.
Okay, Kodak City Special, and he's fascinated with movies. He goes and sees, I believe he sees in this story, I think he sees the Phantom Creeps, or is it Shadow of Chinatown?
I think he sees both. I'm pretty sure that would be first.
Does he see the movie with Lugosi and Karloff also?
He does. That's the first thing that
Invisible
he sees,
Ray?
I think. Yeah. Starring.
Oh, it had Karloff and Lugosi in it.
Oh yeah, Karloff as Dr. Janos Rook and Bela Lugosi as Dr. Felix Benet.
And it's just like he's like a boy, very interested. I mean, he gets in trouble because he's skipping school to watch these movies, right?
Yeah.
And what does his dad tell him he can't enjoy? Do you remember that part? I can tell you if
Toward
you
the
don't.
beginning or the end?
It's near the beginning, but he gets sort of put on restriction, and he doesn't get to have much food for Christmas Eve, I believe. All right, and that stuff. So I think Frank does a good job of telling him as a little boy and how he gets his interest in things.
Yeah.
And the very end of he finally gets this camera, but his father tells him, you got to pay for things and stuff like that. You have a little bit of stuff right here. And do you know what the Hindenburg was?
Yeah.
So what happened to the Hindenburg? Yeah, it was a blimp that went down. And so what is Ed doing before that happens? What does he film?
He films the Hindenburg.
Yeah, and this is in the story. I mean, it's apocryphal. I don't know if it's real. He says he's just writing fiction, but he gets this really special experience of having on film the Hindenburg before it blows up.
And that serves into the larger narrative in the story about how he learns to appreciate stock footage.
Yeah,
as
he
the
does.
free way to make movies.
Good point. Yeah, because Wood loves stock footage, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a story that I think is pretty good in the book. All the stories are good, but I wanted to mention a few. Another one is, where is it right now? It's by
Braddock.
Not Braddock. We'll get
Not
to
Braddock.
Braddock,
Okay,
okay? Because I want you to talk about Braddock also.
Okay.
This one is by Kurt McCoy, who's a great writer, and he's a hard worker. He edited this book. He wrote The Green Dragon, inspired by Glinda Glinda.
Page 295.
And it is a crazy story. Starts out with the big George Weiss building. Well, George Weiss was a one-lung filmmaker who made really low-budget stuff, and he was where he helped Wood. Well, he was the guy who funded Wood's Glinda Glinda. But anyway, somewhere in this, it starts out with a green blob type of thing coming in and going through the building and everything. And it's sort of kept under wraps sometimes. And they have the scientist. I don't know if you're familiar with I Am a Glinda Glinda, but Bela Lugosi plays the scientist who oversees everything. But then it gets into a guy named Dennis, who discovers he has an alter personality he can see, like through in windows and things like that, who's Denise. And she becomes they're sort of sharing each other's lives. And Dennis wants to help Denise and everything. And so Dennis goes and buys women's clothes and things like that, and makeup and lingerie and stuff like that. To make a long story short, though, when Dennis is out as Denise one night, you see, Dennis has to do what Ed Wood did. Ed Wood was a transvestite, and so Dennis has to dress up. But when Denise is part of Dennis, she has all the body parts, and some cops come and harass Dennis because they see him as a transvestite. Transvestites were treated very badly, and things like that. And he gets beat up severely. And so, but Denise, and I hope to Kurt I'm doing justice with the story. It's it's a very detailed story. I'm just giving an overview. Denise is like beaten to a pulp and in dire straits, in danger of perhaps even dying afterwards. And Dennis has to make a very interesting decision. And now I won't say any much more about that right now. Let me go to another one by a guy named Dwight Kemper. I thought this was an interesting story. It's called, I think it's called, come on, Doug. My fingers don't work as well as younger people's on these phones. It may be Heaven Knows Mr. Wood. Let me see. Yeah, it's by Dwight Kemper, who's done quite a bit of writing also. Kemper is also an artist. And there's art in this book by various artists.
Yeah.
And Kemper's art is his own here. But anyways, he talks about Wood's death. Wood's death was almost your typical Hollywood tale, and it's real. He was kicked out of he was an alcoholic, a severe alcoholic. He and his wife Kathy were kicked out of their apartment, and Wood went to one of his few friends left in the industry named Peter Coe, who was an actor of some repute. Peter, for example, is in House of Frankenstein, all right? And Wood was just sitting there waiting to go see the doctor. But one Sunday he was watching football. Now some people dispute this because they say Wood wasn't a football fan, but what isn't disputed is he died. He was in the room watching football and he was crying, telling people he had a heart attack, and apparently, unfortunately, they weren't really paying attention to him. And when they came in to see him, he had died. And so Kemper's story has him going to heaven, or at least going to the pearly gates and then later. And heaven, as defined by Kemper, is getting the opportunity to fulfill what pleases you most, all right? And so Wood notices he can wear women's clothes if he wants to. But what I love about the story is he gets to sit and hang out with Basil Rathbone, Bela Lugosi, and Boris Karloff. And there's some pretty witty dialogue between these three spirits, who are in Hollywood. I don't want to give away the last thing Wood does. This is a short book, a short story, but it's quite good. And I'm going to go to another one now, and it's by our friend Christopher Gauthier. And Chris is a winner of the Rondo Award for Best Fiction. I think it wasn't this year. I think it was last year for 2022. It's called Dracula Never Dies, The Revenge of Bela Vorlach. Superb book. You can go to Plan9Crunch and read reviews of a lot of these things. That's our blog, plan9crunch.com. But anyways, Gauthier Gauthier's story is called The Atomic Dream in the Wilderness of Tibet. And I liked it because this is not the only story that does this, but it gives us a backstory to Bride of the Monster. Now, Bride of the Monster has the professor, and he is in the story he's a Russian. He's from Russia, trying very desperately to get away. Professor Eric Vornoff, and he's trying to get away from Russian agents because he developed a plan to make atomic Superman, and they started to not like what he was doing and trying to find him all over the world. So he's in Tibet, and Gauthier can write really good primal scream type of writing. Okay, he's in an area of Tibet run by this woman who is just totally depraved, and a woman who is basically allows white slavery and things like that and torture to go on in this area. And Vornoff pays her a lot of money for some sanctuary, okay, in this area in Tibet, because he's trying to get away from the Russian agents always pursuing him. And so he discovers that her assistant is this large, enormously large, almost beast-like man who has scars on his body, and he's almost childlike but very strong. And that's Lobo, played by Tor Johnson in Bride of the Monster. I don't want to give too much of the details. I want people to enjoy the story. But what happens is that eventually, this is the story of how Vornoff got Lobo as his kind of mute assistant, because Bride of the Monster, it takes place in the United States. I've never been 100% sure about where it's set, but I think most people think it's set Bride of the Monster in the Florida area. But I'm not 100% sure of that. So that's another good story. I'm going to do one more story, and then we'll talk about Brad Braddock. And Braddock is the publisher of Arcane Shadows Press. There was a story I thought was pretty good here. Where is it? Hold on a second. Oh, it wasn't a story. I'm sorry. It's the beginning chapter, which is an homage to sort of an homage or a remembrance of Conrad Brooks. And that was written by George Chastain, who is an excellent artist too, by the way. This is like 40 or 50 pages. It's Conrad Brooks was in many Ed Wood films. He was in Glinda Glinda. He was in Plan 9 from Outer Space, and he had a small part, barely, but you saw him in Bride of the Monster, and probably in some films too. But those three I recall him mainly. Conrad was the New York Times later in his life called him the Gil Gould of bad movies. Ed Wood's kind of post-life fame in the 80s really boosted Conrad Brooks, who got a lot of roles. But when Conrad Brooks was still struggling, he was also in the 50s, had very small roles in a couple of Bowery Boys movies. Mm. And he had a role in The Beast of Yucca Flats, the zero budget narrated movie that, what's his name? Coleman Francis made that starred, I think it was Tor Johnson's last film. But George Chastain talks about his friendship with Conrad, and it's quite, at times, bittersweet. But it's a nice, uplifting tale, and there are some things I didn't know about Conrad Brooks, how he was involved in kind of, relationships with former Western stars like that, and how he was involved in the industry, but sometimes on the fringes of the industry. But what's really kind of poignant about this essay is Conrad Brooks's last years, which were a little bit heartbreaking because he died, I'm guessing, in kind of poverty. He was living in a trailer. It didn't really have any cable or anything, and he had to have things brought to him by good friends to help. But Conrad Brooks has always been a great guy. If you watch some documentaries in the 90s or articles in Cult Movies magazine, Conrad had some very interesting stuff. There's a documentary called On the Trail of Ed Wood that's still around. It's probably on YouTube, where Conrad reminisces about living with Wood, and they actually go the neighborhoods where Wood made his films and lived and things like that. Joe, let's talk about Brad's story, which I think is pretty good. First, some backstory. Brad Braddock is the publisher, and he is an author of a couple of novels, or short novels, but they're really good. One is called Memoirs of Murder, which is a prequel to White Zombie, and talks about how Murder Legendre, who the main character Lugosi played in that film, became the person he is in White Zombie. Another one, what's it called? The House of Igor came out, I believe, last year or the year before last. And that is a backstory for Igor, the character in Son of Frankenstein that Bela Lugosi took over. And Lugosi was so good in that movie that no one thinks about Fritz now anymore, all right?
Yeah.
In Frankenstein. Although I believe Fritz was killed in Frankenstein, so that's also... But everyone thinks of Igor. In fact, when Mel Brooks made Young Frankenstein, there was... Well, he called himself Igor, but there was a comedy.
He acts more like Fritz, though. It's the name that's stuck for Igor, unfortunately.
Well, of course, he had the hunchback, though, too. Remember his hunch changed places?
Yeah, that was funny. Didn't Fritz
Young
also have a
Frankenstein's a
hunchback?
classic film. What?
Didn't Fritz also have a hunchback, though?
I don't recall him having that, but you could be right. I have to check
I'd have
that.
to rewatch, yeah.
Dwight Fry played a character where he was always sort of not a nerd, but sort of a misfit. Like, Fry was a misfit in the vampire bat who the folks kill. And then Fry's last role was was the George Zuko movie Dead Men Walk, where he played a Renfield type character, although he wasn't Renfield, but a Renfield type character who was trying to help George Zuko as the vampire. If you've never seen Dead Men Walk, you might want to watch it sometime.
Okay.
It's not a great movie, but it's not a bad movie. It's one of the better non-Lugosi vampire movies in the 40s. But now I've been talking. Okay, so I mentioned two books that Brad Braddock has written, and you can get them both at Arcane Shadows Press. He's written other books too, previous, but let's get to this one. The story is called, let me find it really quick.
The Night the Devil Met Igor, with an I.
Yes, and now, who is the character? I'm going to tell you the character.
Okay.
This is not about Igor.
It's not.
This is about the making of Glinda Glinda, and a character, if you've seen Glinda Glinda, now I learned that he also played Edward's father in the movie. I didn't know that, but he's most known for the devil, and he's played by a character named Captain DeZita.
Yeah.
Joe Blevins has done some research on DeZita also. He had a colorful history, and not colorful in a pure way necessarily. He was basically, at the time, taking care of strippers, in L.A. at the time. He died soon after the movie was made, but you can read more about him at the Edward Wednesday's blog. But Brad, tell us a little bit about this story, what kind of character he is and how menacing he is.
Well, for one thing, DeZita is very predatory. That's the main thing. I guess in multiple ways, more just against the woman, but we are in his thoughts
Who
for,
is the
for
woman
a second.
in this story?
The woman is Dolores.
Dolores Fuller, who was Edward's co-star in that movie.
Yeah.
And also his girlfriend at the time.
So we're in DeZita's thoughts for a little bit of it as he's actively acting like a predator and also thinking like a predator.
Stalking her, isn't he?
Stalking her,
I mean,
yeah.
he really, in all due respect, he wants to probably rape her, all right, in this.
Well, yeah, just that word might not do well on YouTube. Don't want to get this taken down.
Sexually assault her. We can change it to that.
Yeah.
Edit it out if you want to. But that's really what it's about, and she's trying to get away from him, and there's a premiere of a movie that she gets into to run away from him. And this is where this is where real fact enters into the fiction. Lugosi made an appearance. It was House of Wax, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. It was a Vincent Price movie. And Lugosi did make an appearance. Based on biographies I've read of Lugosi, he was a little bit embarrassed by this because he was holding like a fake ape or something on a chain. But you know what? He was trying to make a living in those times, and this was probably a good payday for him. But they just wrapped up. Once again, this is fiction, and I don't want to say Captain DeZita was this bad. I don't know for sure, okay? But they're wrapping up the movie. He's like the last one. She's like the last one leaving. And DeZita's stalking her through the alleys, right?
Yeah.
And she gets into the theater, and who protects her? I like this twist Braddock put in the story.
Charles Buchinski.
But who is Charles Buchinski? Are you too young to know who Charles Buchinski is?
Charles Bronson?
Bronson, yeah. I mean, Bronson was a huge star in the late 60s. I think the film, a Western film, may have been the one with Henry Fonda is really bad, the Sergio Leone, Once Upon a Time in the West. But then he became a big star in a movie called, oh gosh, I should know these things. He became a big star for a movie where he's like, he ends up shooting people who are trying to rob him. And I can't remember. I hate it when I can't remember things. Getting old here. But he made several, Death Wish, I think it might have been called. He made several sequels to that. Bronson made a lot of good films. He made a good film when he was a bare-knuckle boxer called Hard Times. Then he got stuck into canon and made a bunch of action films that sort of diminished his star a little bit. Now, he's passed away now. He was married to Gerald Ireland, a beautiful woman, some of his movies, who died of cancer before he did. But anyways, Charles Bronson, I don't want to give away the ending of this, but he's kind of the hero of this movie. And they had a story, I guess. But I thought it was clever of Braddock to put Bronson, who apparently had a very bit part in this movie. You know, a lot of big stars had bit parts in our kind of cult genre films of the 50s. One of the Creature movies, it may have been Revenge, or it may have been the third one, it has Clint Eastwood in a small role. And I just watched a movie called Voodoo Island, which I did not like, sorry. Boris Karloff starred, but it was not a great film. But Adam West, who became Batman, had his first role in that movie too. And it's kind of fun sometimes to watch these movies. Of course, in the movie Jailbait, Steve Reeves, who became Hercules a decade later, had a small role in Ed Wood's Jailbait. Want to mention a couple more things before we wrap up here. There is a very interesting thing at the end. There's Ed Wood's draft card, which is interesting too, but at the very end, Frank Delastrito, and he was going to be here, and I was going to press him and talk about this. He went to Forrest J. Ackerman's Acker Mansion, which was full of all genre stuff, memorabilia. And this was way back in 1973, and he asked to see anything on Lugosi. So Ackerman gave him a box, and Frank went through it and saw some letters that Ed Wood, as his more or less half agent at the time, had written to Lugosi while Lugosi was working at the Silver Slipper. It was a nice gig for Lugosi at that time. He was there for 7 or 8 weeks, I think. And at the time, Wood's trying to set up a movie for him. And one of them would have been The Bowery Boys Meets the Monster. I remember reading long ago somewhere that he was supposed to be in that movie. It didn't happen. I've read that Lugosi was just too exhausted. But Wood's talking about all these opportunities. At the same time, you can read these letters. They're fascinating because Frank transcribed them. Wood is upset because people are accusing him of chiseling for money. And in one letter, he tells Lugosi like 8 times he has to tell a big guy in Los Angeles who could play a role in their future that I didn't do this, I didn't do this, I didn't do this. I can't stress to you how important it is I didn't have this $300 bill or something in Las Vegas. So you get a kind of work of how determined Wood is, but also how desperate he is and how much he's struggling for money at times too. But I think some people think that Ed Wood was trying to exploit Lugosi. I think that these letters Frank has transcribed show that he was trying to work pretty hard for him. The problem with Ed Wood was he wasn't a big person in the industry, and he would invariably get disappointed. There's even an article published in one of the Los Angeles papers, probably the Times, where they mention that Lugosi's going to star in Bowery Boys Meets the Monsters. It wasn't uncommon then for publicity agents to leak stuff to the press. That never happened. You can find those things all the time. So anyways, the book is called, Joe, could you read it one more time what the book is called?
Ed Wood's Warm Angora Wishes and Rubber Octopus Dreams.
Yes, it's from Arcane Shadows Press. You can buy it at Amazon, probably at Barnes & Noble. It may be in some local bookstores in different places. It apparently sold very well at Monster Bash, I'm told. And it's a kind of book that I think is necessary as Wood continues to gain fans and interest in his unique style of filmmaking and writing too. We all saw Johnny Depp. That's and Ed Wood. That was a good movie. It was sort of a fairy tale at times, but I'm hoping someday we'll have a movie made of the other half or other 3/4 of Wood's career. As depressing as it might have been, it'd be fascinating how he moved himself through the 1960s, made films with Stephen Apostoloff, and even went into what they called Pulp Fiction. He wrote over 100 books, and now they fetch pretty high prices if you can find the originals. Anyways, this is Plan9Crunch, Doug Gibson with Joe Gibson, and we are on YouTube. Please, if you like us, we have like 47 stuff. Just subscribe to YouTube. It helps us. It doesn't cost anything. We also have a Facebook page. I think it's called Plan9Crunch Podcast and Blog. And we have a TikTok page too. And we do podcasts, audio podcasts. We need to do more of those. We mainly be doing video. And what more can I say right now? We've enjoyed telling you about this wonderful book. And I'll be appreciative if anyone takes the time to read what we write. Writers love that. And that's a wrap.